Twilight Imperium is a massive space battle game. You can think of it like Civilization in space. You're moving, flying around a large galaxy that you create with your friends, using a whole fleet of spaceships, fighters, destroyers that you create on these orbital space docks, these orbital ship factories. I could sit here and tell you about how epic and everything that this game is, but let's cut the shit and start talking about concepts that will help you get started. Now first, let's go ahead and look at the board. The board is modular, made up of tiles that represent different types of space. Here we have the empty space, nothing special here. But here, on the other hand, we have a supernova, and this cannot be traveled through at all. In some systems, we can find planets. There are two separate planets that can be colonized individually, and the planets have give you the benefit of either providing production, the number in green, or influence, the number in red. This just happens to be a very influence-light system. Over here, you can see this planet has an influence of 2. So production allows you to build, and influence allows you to vote in the Senate, essentially. Here we have a home planet, and above the home planet, we have a space dock. This space dock is used to create new units. So here's a few fighters. Essentially, this is the map. And here's the score tracker. To win the game, you need 10 victory points. Periodically over the course of the game, you'll draw these objective cards. This one says, I control 5 planets outside my home system. So you'll place this down. And if one of the players meets this criteria, they control 5 planets outside of their home system. At the end of a turn, then they put one of their little race flags on it to indicate that they've gotten that point, and then they move up that many victory points. So this is 1. Then a little bit later, the next one will come out, and this one says, all 3 of my space docks are on the board, which means you just have to build enough space docks so that you run out of minis in your reinforcements. And then if you get that, at the end of the turn, you can say, okay, I can achieve this, and you move up 1. Now, typically, you may not achieve more than 1 of these on a turn. Even if you meet the requirements, you'll have to meet the requirements another turn. So you just keep doing these until you get 10 victory points, and you win. An interesting point, and an important point to make, is somebody else is also trying to get this point. So every person in the game might be going after this public objective. Probably should be going after this public objective. So even if you score it, it's not taken away. You don't get this card. The next person gets to put down on there too and advance themselves up the score tracker. It's really important to say that these objectives are the way that you win the game. The game is not about building up a huge fleet and just rolling over the enemies until you're the last person on the board. If you can accomplish these objectives and you get the victory points faster, that's how you win. So all of your actions need to reinforce solving these, need to reinforce accomplishing these objectives. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the units in the game, because when you first start playing the game, you have carriers and destroyers and ground forces and fighters and space dock and dreadnoughts and, war suns and cruisers and PDS. Let me find a PDS here real quick. Here's a cruiser, actually. PDS. PDS. And a PDS, right? So that's a lot of crap to have to learn. So when I first played it, I was trying to think, okay, what does a good fleet even look like? I have no clue. I give up. Well, I didn't really give up. I was having a blast, so I just kept going. But there's a few things you need to know, and then this will all come together pretty clearly. The first thing is you create new units by having a space dock. The space dock is actually orbiting around a planet and is not really considered to be in space, but it's just like in orbit around your planet. And using the space dock, you can create fighters, for example, or basically anything that can be created, you can create with a space dock. But you can create fighters, which are these little throwaway craft. Whenever you spend 1, you get 2 fighters. So these essentially exist as cannon fodder. So when you get into a battle, as you take wounds, these blow up, basically, and you don't blow up any of your more powerful, more expensive units. But fighters aren't able to travel around the galaxy on their own. They're reliant on support, refueling, etc. So they have to be coupled with a space dock or with a carrier. Now, a carrier is a very pivotal unit. You can hold up to 6 units inside of it. And you can see there's 6 little bays on this unit. And so, for example, I can basically dock, air quotes, these fighters into this carrier. And now the carrier can travel. And when it travels, it carries the fighters with them. Now, this is how you basically get around carrying a bunch of fighters. So a carrier can carry up to 6 fighters. And that's a lot of dice that you can roll when it comes to a battle. And a way to counteract that is actually to use a type of unit called a destroyer. A destroyer is basically an anti-fighter weapon. If you get into a fight with a carrier and any number of fighters, then you get a special attack called an anti-fighter barrage. So the destroyer, when it goes up against this fleet, it'll first attack the fighters without anything having a chance to attack it back right away. So it gets first strike. It gets a first attack against fighters. So this is kind of a rock, paper, scissors mechanic. These fighters are cheap little units that you can build and use to soak up damage so that your big, expensive, powerful stuff doesn't get destroyed. But in converse, the destroyer comes in and it gets to just try to shoot a bunch of them out of the sky before they even get a chance to attack. So destroyers are a good anti-fighter unit. Here we have a ground force. Now, it's just a little flag. It's not really a person, a character. It represents something. It represents basically you being on the ground and having control of that. So you can invade with a number of ground forces. And if there's nobody on the planet, then you get it. If there are already forces on the planet, ground forces, then you have to get into a fight. This is a planetary invasion combat. It's not the same as when spaceships fight. This is them being dropped into atmosphere and landing on the planet and having an attack. So these are ground units, and that's what ground units are used for. Also on the ground are PDS units. Now, PDS units are planetary defense systems. And the idea is they kind of put a little shield around the planet so that they can't be bombed from space. Because if you have ground units on the planet, then they can be bombed by certain types of units and then get killed before the enemy's ground units even go down there. Ideally, if somebody's invading your planet, you have some ground units, they try to land and you fight them off. But not as easy if they're being bombed. Well, a PDS puts up a shield around the planet so it can't be bombed, except for by a war sun, which is a hard thing to stop anyway. But also, if any units are moving in, like to come attack this planet, the PDS gets a free cannon shot off of the planet to the attacking force. So if you have a couple PDSs or a couple planets that each have PDSs, you can get a decent chance that you're going to hit something when they come into your system. So a PDS is a defensive unit. Now, how do you get PDSs onto a planet? Well, you come in with a carrier that has maybe a couple fighters, maybe a PDS, maybe 2 ground forces, maybe 3 ground forces. So here's a carrier with a full load. It has these fighters that can take up some damage so that it doesn't get blown up and all the expensive stuff being carried on it doesn't get blown up. And it comes in and says, okay, I'm going to deposit this PDS and these ground units. I'm going to keep this on me, this one ground unit, these 2 fighters. And it deposits them, then it goes on its way. And of course, the ground forces can't move from planet to planet. They're ground forces, so they require a carrier as well. PDSs are the same. Next up, we have the cruiser. Now, the cruiser is basically the all-arounder in Twilight Imperium. It can move really fast. It's decent enough at combat. It's cheap enough. And it doesn't really have any special. The instruction guide points out, there's no special rules for this ship. So this is kind of like the Ryu of Twilight Imperium ships. That brings us to the Dreadnought. The Dreadnought is a big battleship. It can bomb planets when it's attacking the system, when it's attacking the planet. It can roll pretty well in combat, but it also has a cool ability where if it gets hit, you turn it upside down. And that indicates it's taken 1 point of damage, essentially. On the second hit, it blows up and is removed. But it's nice because it's big enough, it's robust enough that it can take extra damage. And at the end of the full turn, if you have ships that are damaged like this, then they get healed. So it's pretty sweet. And finally, that brings us to the War Sun. Now, the War Sun is very clearly a Death Star. It's so clearly a Death Star that at the end of the instruction guide, there is an optional rule for basically making trench runs, like in Star Wars, where you can fly a fighter into the trench of the War Sun and deal with the challenges there, and then have a chance to blow it up, basically by shooting its vulnerable point deep into the War Sun. War Suns attack harder than anything. They can hold other units like a carrier, so it can move around, and if it has a carrier with it, for example, that's moving a lot of units. And it can bombard a planet despite it being protected by a planetary defense system. So this is basically the heaviest hitter. This is basically the big, strong unit until flagships get added in a later expansion. Well, I mean, they still are. They still are clearly, but flagships are the only thing even close. And those are the units. You can kind of see how they each have their goals. The carriers bring ground forces and PDSs around from planet to planet. The star docks, the space docks, allow you to construct new units. The cruisers travel quickly and effectively across the the galaxy. Dreadnoughts are big, powerful attackers, and War Suns are the Death Star. PDS units can protect your planets. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about moving your ships around space, because the system is a little bit unintuitive. Essentially, what you really want to be doing is taking a tactical action. Now, a tactical action is really just an action that is specific to the tactics on the game board. You want to move ships, you want to build this, you want to go into a fight, you want to invade a planet. All of these things are considered tactical actions. So when you hear tactical action, it means doing something on the game board. In order to move ships around, I activate a system. Now, each tile represents a single system. In this case, I'm going to activate this system, which allows me to move my ships into it. Now, once that's activated, I won't be able to use that system. I won't be able to activate that system again until everyone has used up and passed their turns before the next round starts. So in this example, the cruiser can move 2 and the dreadnought may only be able to move 1. So if I want to activate this system, what I can do is fly the cruiser here because the cruiser can move 2. But I can't fly the dreadnought here because it can only move 1. So as you see, activation basically paints a target onto one of these systems. If I want to move in here and fight, I could do that. I can move it in here, and once I'm in here and there's 2 different types of ships in space in a system, then there's going to be a fight. And that's just how that's going to go. In addition, you don't move one group. So I don't move these ships. What I do is paint the target of where I want my ships to go. So if I have this ship here, this is here, what I can do is activate this system, the target's painted. The dreadnought can only move 1, but that's far enough to get it into this system. The cruiser can then move 2, and then it is in this system. Now, it's interesting to note, in a later turn, I can activate that system and that's fine. But I can't move any ships from a system that's already been activated. So imagine that I have the cruiser and I want to move here. So I target this system and I can't move my dreadnoughts over there because they are in a system that's already been activated. However, I can move my cruiser. So movement is less moving this stack. It's not about saying, oh, okay, I'm moving this whole stack of units. I'm just saying I want to be able to go here and I will bring any ship that is legally able to move into that system. I want to bring them there. Then you can continue your tactical action by doing other things, including if you have a space dock, you can move into the space, but of course you can also do production in that space. So when you activate a space, you do the stuff that has to do with activating that space. Production, moving ships into it,